These last couple of times, I've talked about one of my favorite verses in all the Bible, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. Cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. To me, it offers me comfort. It gives me hope. And I've shared, I struggle with anxiety. And I hope, this hopeful verse has given you hope as well. It's a little bit ironic, but I don't think it was intentionally ironic by the Holy Spirit and Peter. But let's look at verse 8. Right after this incredibly wonderful promise that God cares for us. And because of that, we can cast our cares, all of our anxieties on him. Right after that, in verse 8, is a reality that I think a lot of times we just blow right past. Well, here we go. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. When I was in youth ministry, I served as a youth minister for 17 and a half years. I don't know that the half year makes much difference, but for 17 years, I worked with kids and their families. And one of the things I would tell, especially my senior high kids, is that we can never forget that the devil is as real as Jesus. He's not as powerful, but he is as real. And if we fail to register that he is real, he is out there, he is, and his emissaries are all around, we're going to be in a world of hurt. And that's why Peter says, be alert and of sober mind. Because we live in I think we live in a culture that is obsessed with comfort and safety. We take our comfort and our safety for granted until something big happens and gets our attention, like COVID-19. And suddenly, everybody in our world is all hypervigilant. Well, and COVID-19 is a real thing, and people really have died from it. We can't be dumb about it, but on the other hand, it's not the only thing to be alert to. Be alert and sober-minded. We live in a culture where our need for real alertness is fairly low because we don't have, where I live, I don't have any wild animals prowling. I don't. I'm thankful to God. My neighborhood is not crime-ridden. I lock my car doors and we lock our house doors. That's just, use your brain. But it's a safe place. The world we live in is generally very safe. Bad things happen. There are bad people, but it's pretty safe. Well, if you're lulled into this comfortable, safe mentality, you kind of are drawing a big fluorescent target on your chest for an enemy who really exists and who really is out there and who really does want to do away with you. Be alert and of sober mind. I'm going to resist the temptation because I could go on a very long rant about sober-mindedness. It just doesn't exist very often in our world. To be sober-minded, think, what in the world does that mean? Well, if you are sober, it means you are in control of your faculties and capacities, right? To be not sober is what? Drunk. When you are not controlling your faculties and your capacities. To be sober-minded means you are capable of making good choices. If you're not sober-minded, you're not going to make good choices. These two things of this kind of mental and spiritual alertness and sober-mindedness, they don't get very much airtime in our world. I'm trying to remember the last time I ever heard a sermon or a fairly substantial teaching on these two ideas. They go a little bit together with the concept that in our world, common sense is not common anymore. And the reason is because people are alert to a lot of things that don't really matter and dulled to some ultimate realities that really do matter. And they're not very sober-minded. We are kind of, whatever. We're not focused in the way we think. Okay, that's enough of a rant for that. Here's why that's important. Because you have an enemy. Your enemy, the devil. You see, the devil is our ultimate enemy. Whoever votes for a candidate that you don't want to see elected is not your enemy. They have a different opinion and they've cast their vote differently, and they may even have a very different vision for what your city, state, United States could and should be, but they're not the enemy. The opposing view is not necessarily the enemy. See, the enemy is the devil. Our enemy, the devil. C.S. Lewis wrote he's my favorite author of all time. And one of the books that is a great place to start with C.S. Lewis is, if you've never read anything by C.S. Lewis, is the Screwtape Letters. And it's a fictional piece. What he does is he pretends that he is the uncle of a demon uncle of a young nephew apprentice. And they're in correspondence about how this young nephew is tempting his subject. It's a terrific book. Screwtape is the uncle, Wormwood is the nephew, and one of the letters, each chapter is a letter, and that Screwtape writes to Wormwood. He says, one of the greatest weapons you have is to let your subject believe that Satan doesn't really exist, or that he is some fictional, Halloweenish kind of, pitchfork, red suit, horns on his forehead, pointy tail. One of his points is, if they don't believe you're their enemy, why would they ever protect themselves against you? I think there's a lot of people who are that way. Now, I will say, I know of people who they seem to think there is a demon in every shadow, that the devil is everywhere reading your thoughts and plotting for your demise in every little way. I don't... everything that bad that happens is because the devil is in attack. That when life is hard, it's a spiritual battle. And where do you fall on it? I mean, Satan, oh gosh, that's an antiquated idea, for crying out loud. Or Satan is everywhere. is scared. You should be scared all the time because he is. He having a bad day? Hey, it's Satan. Where do you fall? Somewhere in the middle that truly believes we do have a lethal and mortal enemy, the devil, but his power, his abilities, his who he is and what he does is limited. One of the places we see that he is limited is in the Old Testament book of Job, where the author describes how the angels come before God, and Satan, by the way, Satan is a fallen angel in rebellion against God. At any rate, he comes into this audience with God and says to God, so you've made life so easy for that guy Job. You let me after him. You let me go to work on him and he'll deny you. Well, God said, no, I don't think he will. And he grants permission for Satan to do horrible things. Satan, first of all, he takes all of his worldly wealth, his livestock, his slaves, his crops. Then he takes his daughters and sons. And then, as if that weren't enough, he strikes Job with sores, which I think the interpretation that best fits these sores is they were boils from head to toe, from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And the picture is of him scraping his skin with shards of pottery to try and scrape the dead skin off. That is not where you want to be. And it's especially not where you want to be if you don't have a dermatologist handy, a hospital with a burn care unit. You don't have antibiotics. You don't have antiseptics. You don't have anything other than what you can put your hands on right in front of you. None of that bad stuff happened by accident. None of it happened without God's knowledge or permission. Satan is permitted to do what he does by God. Did God tell Satan to do these horrible things to Job? No, he didn't. But he permitted them. I don't want to make more of this than we need to, but we have to pause and reflect on the fact that when Satan goes to work in your life, God is not looking the other way. Satan is not pulling the wool over God's eyes and doing an end around to do things in your life and my life and in the world that God just didn't see coming. See, there are no trick plays for God. See, he knows everything. And either he causes it or he permits it. So there is nothing Satan can do that God does not permit him to do. This is important. Many of the things that God permits seem somewhere between difficult and impossible to explain. Why on September 11th, 2001, would two American Airlines jets crash into the Twin Towers in New York City? I believe that was the work of our enemy, the devil, using human agency, which he virtually always does. Why would God permit that? We lost just shy of 3,000 people. This was not in war. This was an act of terrorism. I can't explain it. I don't have an explanation. Now, there were some very interesting and ultimately very good things that came of that event. But why the event happened, I am not satisfied with the answer for why that happened being, well, it's so that these good things could happen. Sorry, that won't do. That won't comfort the families of 3,000 folks lost to terrorists. I can't explain it. There's many things I can't explain except to say we have an enemy. We're going to come back to this, and I'll do my best to stay a little better on topic next time. I hope I get to see you then on So Care with Stevie Boy.